Good afternoon. Thank you for participating in VHMA's monthly webinar series. My name is Peggy O'Brien, and our webinar today is Confrontation, Conflict Management, and De-Escalation. Our presenters are Ray McGarry and Mike Zegadlo. We have allotted, and before I forget important information, our sponsor today is Nord Health. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Ray is the Executive Director of the Chicago Veterinary Medical Association and possesses a wealth of leadership experience gained through decades of providing strategic direction to the influence organizational growth. Prior to joining CVMA in early 2022, Ray administrated top-level direction in the law enforcement and parks and recreation industries. Additionally, he is the president and founder of RJM Strategy Group, a company based in Naperville, Illinois, that provides comprehensive security strategy expertise and leadership to a wide variety of organizations and businesses. Ray's credentials include over 30 years of law enforcement and executive level leadership, with tenure at the Naperville and Bolingbrook Police Departments, where he served as a captain and chief of police. Ray holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in criminal justice from St. Xavier University and a Master of Public Administration from Northern Illinois University, and also is a graduate of Northwestern School of Police Staff and Command and the Rocky Mountain Executive Management Program. I'd like to introduce Mike. Prior to transitioning into a career in law enforcement, Mike served as a university administrator specializing in student development. As a police officer, Mike has served as a use of force instructor, patrol supervisor, and administrator. Mike has a master's degree in organizational leadership and has completed the Northwestern University School of Police Staff Command. Mike currently serves as chief of the Lewis University Police Department. Ray and Mike, we are thrilled to have you with us today. And this topic is so important and has a wide interest, I think, probably a sign of the times right now. And so I know you have some great resources in our resources tab. I've already said I'm plastering them all over my office, but we are delighted to have you both with us. And Ray, I think you're going to start us off.
I am, Peggy. Hey, thanks a lot for the introduction, and hello everybody from, looks like across the country in different time zones and Canada. So it's great to be here to share some of our insights on confrontation, conflict management, and de-escalation, because after all, none of that is really going on in our society today, anywhere. And I obviously say that facetiously. What we're going to try to do today in the short period of time we have, we're not going to make you the Jason Bournes of de-escalation, although I think Jason Bourne doesn't de-escalate much. He just winds up going and killing a bunch of people. But to use that as an analogy, what we're going to try to do is give you some skills that you can take away from this presentation and practice. I'm sure I've got hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes on the screen right now. And the way you get good at something is you have to practice. Very rarely do you just step up and become proficient at something. It takes practice. In my 30 years and Mike's all of his years in law enforcement, this is what we did for a living. Unlike the TV shows you see where at the end the police officer, the detective is shooting and killing somebody, 95, 98% of the time, we're talking people down. Now, I have worked with some real idiots, and I say that as in law enforcement, that would sometimes make things worse, unfortunately. But the vast majority of us got good at this by practicing it. And before I turn it over to Mike, I just kind of leave you with this, is that when you are trying to de-escalate a situation, you try to put yourself in the position of the person who's angry with you. And Mike will talk about what's important now. And, don't go home tonight and practice this on your spouse, your significant other. But just imagine if you said to them, hey, just calm down. Just imagine the reaction that you're going to get. And now transfer that over to the person across from you who's just angry upon angry for whatever reason. So again, we've got just a little less than an hour. I think you'll benefit from this. I hope you do. And certainly, if you have any questions, you have my information. I'm with the Chicago Veterinary Medical Association. And one last thing, you're probably scratching your heads going, how in God's name did this guy end up working for the CVMA in Chicago? I was on the Humane Society board, one of the largest ones in Illinois, for 8 years as a board of directors. So that's my connection to the CVMA here and how I'm sitting in this chair now. So all that said, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ray. Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you on the East Coast, good morning still. Ray started out by explaining that this is not the kind of thing you learn overnight. We are not going to, in an hour, take you from someone who is not really well equipped to have confrontations or to manage difficult people and reprogram you in an hour to do this. This is difficult stuff. It's something that I've struggled with my whole career. I wasn't always in law enforcement. Before I came into that career in my 30s, and before I was in law enforcement, I worked in education, and I was kind of a whole different person. I had long hair and an earring. I played guitar in a band. I was kind of a peace and love guy. And I can distinctly remember the moment where I realized that I had a deficiency as it related to this skill set. When I was in college, I applied to be an RA because I thought that would be a great way to get to know people and make connections with the community and do programs and have fun. And the one thing I kind of left out of the equation was that RAs have to knock on people's doors at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell them to quit doing things that they want to do, like turn down their music or quit partying. And I really didn't prepare very well for that. I just assumed I'd figure it out as things went by. And, my first assignment as an RA was on the second floor of Fitzpatrick Hall, where our men's Division I NCAA volleyball team lived. So I don't know if you've met these guys, but they're like 6'9", and you can't probably tell from the camera, but I'm a man of diminutive stature. I'm about a foot shorter than Ray. So on one of my first nights as an RA, the volleyball guys throw a big party down the hall. And so it's my job as an RA to go down there and knock on the door, which made me extremely nervous. And I didn't realize just how nervous or out of whack I was until I got to that door. And I knocked on that door, and I have a history of being a fairly good communicator and being pretty articulate. But something happened to me at that moment where I was at 2 o'clock in the morning, knocking on a door of a loud party, confronting a group of guys who are cool and popular and big and strong. And all of those things built up in me and caused a physiological stress response. So when they opened the door and the 6'8" volleyball player stuck his head out and looked down at me and grunted, and my mission was to say, hey, could you turn down the music? What came out of my mouth was something more like, noise, bad, music, stop. Thank you. And I walked away. And I walked away thinking, what in the heck just happened to me? And I kind of realized at that point that if I'm going to be successful in life, at the time I was planning to be a teacher, I was still going to continue to be an RA. I never planned on being a police officer. But if I was going to be successful in life, I was going to need to figure out what just happened at that door that caused someone who was normally pretty articulate and good at communication to completely have a malfunction, a cognitive malfunction that caused me not to be able to communicate. What I figured out was it was a stress response, which is entirely natural. And as I began to look into why people fail in these kinds of environments, why we short circuit in that way in these kinds of environments, it became pretty obvious. We as a species have only been living in these kind of tight-knit communities where we live in complex organizations, where we rely heavily on our intellect and our cognitive capacity to function for a pretty short time in our evolution. For the majority of our evolution, we were out in the field. We were hunting and gathering. We were confronting deadly threats on a daily basis. So our bodies, our physiology has evolved to manage threats that were from a previous evolutionary stage in our existence. So our body hasn't figured out yet that when the boss comes in to deliver criticism on a performance appraisal, that's different from the saber-toothed tiger jumping out from the bush when we're out doing our hunting and gathering. And so our body gives us the same physiological response that we have instinctually, evolutionarily, biologically evolved into when we are confronted with any type of stimulus that generates fear, embarrassment, anger. Any of those things trigger the saber-toothed tiger response. So when I knocked on that door, my body wasn't processing that I'm talking to a group of 20-year-old volleyball players on a college campus. My body was saying saber-toothed tiger. And what happened was I had this physiological stress response, which caused my cognitive capability, my cognitive computer to disengage, because that's in the bush. When the saber-toothed tiger jumps out, I don't need my computer to be on. I don't need at that moment to be able to formulate language or to determine whether this berry is the poisonous berry or this berry is the nutrient-rich berry. I need to be big, dumb, and strong and fast. And so evolutionarily, our body says computer gets shut off and animal brain gets flicked on. And that visceral self, that animal self, comes out. And that's the part of our physiology that is unhelpful in these situations. So we are completely wired wrong for this kind of confrontation. So this experience of getting better at this begins with suppressing our essential evolutionary biological responses to these kinds of stress, which is really hard and takes a long time to get good at. So we have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to understand that we're not going to be good at this tomorrow, and that we're going to sometimes fail because we're fighting against all of our biology and evolution. We're fighting against the impulse to shut off that cognitive frontal lobe and turn on that midbrain, that makes us big, strong, dumb, and fast. And when you're having an interaction with your supervisor over your performance appraisal, it's not useful to be big, dumb, strong, and fast. So we have to figure out, before we start anything, before we look at any tools for how we manage these conversations, we have to figure out how to manage these biological responses, which are normal and natural, but totally unhelpful for resolving these situations. So we're going to spend a little time first talking about how we get that under control, how we pull cognitive capacity back into our frontal lobe so that we can process language, so that we can listen better, so that we can problem solve, and so that we can begin a communicative interaction as opposed to just firing missiles back and forth at someone who's angry at us. One of the first concepts I like to introduce, especially when I talk to police, is this concept of mushin, which comes to us from martial arts. And the idea of no mind or disinterest or no bias is the ability to kind of remove yourself from the confrontation situation. And it takes a lot of practice. It's difficult to do this. I use the analogy, when I worked patrol in law enforcement, it wasn't uncommon at 2:00 in the morning. I worked the downtown beat in a big city in Illinois. And at 2:00 in the morning, the bars would close. And the city I worked in was rather affluent. So you'd have all these kind of affluent, intoxicated people dump out into the street at 2:00 in the morning. So at 2:00 in the morning, as a patrol officer in that beat, I've got an intoxicated CEO standing in the middle of Jackson Avenue. And I need to get that guy out of the street because it's unsafe for him to be there. And I need to get him home safe to his family. But when I interact with this guy, he has a visceral reaction to being confronted by the police. And his response is not uncommonly to insult, to get angry, to start firing missiles. And when you're a police officer, people tend to evaluate you physically very quickly because that's what they can see. So as someone who's short, bald, sometimes carries a few extra pounds, immediately out of the mouth of that subject might come, "You short, fat, bald, blah, 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 blah." And those things are hurtful to me. That hurts my feelings. It makes me sad to be called short, fat, and bald. So when I exercise mushin, I imagine myself kind of levitating above the confrontation and looking down at it. I take myself kind of out of my body. And I imagine from a third person objective perspective, what's going on right now on this street? Sure, this guy's firing missiles at me. But Ray made reference to this acronym once before, and it's really important to this whole framework. Understanding what's important now, when. I need to in Mushin, I kind of levitate above this confrontation. I look down and I go, what's important right now? What's important right now is getting the drunk guy out of the street. What's important right now is finding a way to get him home safely to his family so he doesn't operate a motor vehicle and perhaps cause a crash. What's not important right now is me asserting my authority as a police officer. There's a statute in Illinois that would allow us to arrest an intoxicated pedestrian in the roadway. So I would have lawful authority to grab him and spin him around and throw him into handcuffs. But that's not really what's important right now. What's important right now is getting him out of the street and getting him home safe to his family. So this exercise of Mushin calls upon us to kind of sort through all of the garbage and the missiles and the junk that's flying at us, and being able to look at that kind of from above and evaluate from a third person perspective, what's really going on? This guy's calling me a jerk, an idiot, whatever. But what's really happening inside dude's head? He's embarrassed. He's fearful. He's angry. He's got all his buddies that he just spent the day on the golf course with, and they're standing there, and he's the CEO of, some corporation making 7 figures, and he's got this diminutive statured public servant dressing him down in the middle of Jackson Avenue. That's embarrassing. He may be fearful that he's going to get arrested. He may be fearful that his wife is going to find out that he's drunk in the middle of the street at 2:00 in the morning. So those stimuli are causing the visceral response for his frontal lobe to shut off and for his animal brain to kick in, and he's firing garbage at me. So when we exercise this Mushin, we're able to parse through all that garbage, all that gobbledygook, and recognize the feelings and the impulses that are generating that response, and then be able to respond to that. So instead of saying, turn around and put your hands behind your back, I might say, hey, look, partner, I want to see you get home safely to your family. And, being out here in the street, I'm afraid you're going to get hit by a car. Why don't we step over to the curb away from your friends who you're embarrassed in front of, and I can talk to you a little bit more about getting a cab, or maybe we'll call an Uber to come pick you up so that you can get home safe to your family, and then you can come back and have a good time tomorrow night. So being able to switch that perspective and not respond to those visceral stimuli that are stimulating that animal response, and just be a little bit more rational in how you respond. That's a first place to start. As Ray correctly referenced, if you're an athlete learning a particular skill, if you're a basketball player learning to do a free throw, you need to practice throwing the ball through the hoop. But a good coach will also tell that basketball player to visualize that shot, to in one's mind's eye, practice, visualize that ball going up, going through the hoop, and not touching the rim or the backboard at all, and just getting net coming through. When I was in high school, I was a long jumper, and before I would jump, I would close my eyes, and I would imagine my steps all being perfectly in line. I would imagine hitting the board right at the perfect mark and launching with perfect form up into the air before I would begin my run. And there's legitimate research that says, if you take a control group that just does practice and rehearsal, and then a group that does practice and rehearsal and visualization, positive, successful visualization, the visualization group does better than the just practice group. The reason that's important for us is because we don't get to practice these intense confrontational interactions very regularly. So you don't get good at it by practicing. You have to study it. You have to visualize it. And then when you do have opportunities to practice it, whether it is at home with your spouse or your kids, or with an angry client at work, you can implement that practice, but you're not going to get sufficient repetition just from practice. So you need to integrate visualization in it. And then the other key piece before we start with any kind of tools or techniques is to be able to manage that stress response, because that stress response is what's driving our inability or our failure to be able to connect with that other human being and communicate and problem solve in a meaningful way. Once that computer goes off and animal brain comes on, we lose the ability to be able to implement any of the tools we're going to be able to talk about. That stress response is critical. And understanding, I ask people to kind of imagine being in a car crash, if you've been in a car crash before, and what your body felt like immediately after the car crash. Imagine what it was like to try to pick up your cell phone and to dial 911. For many of us, there's a there's a lack of fine motor skills. You start to tremor. You might have trouble finding the buttons on the phone. When you finally get the dispatcher on the phone, it's hard to articulate exactly what has happened and what's going on. You may not even know what your location is because that computer has been shut off. So being able to pull that computer back online, my wife had a car crash, pretty bad one. She had someone turned left in front of her as she was going through an intersection. So it was a head-on crash. And then she hit a light pole and the light pole fell on her car. She wasn't able to get out to the airbags all went off, glass shattered, smoke and steam and dust and powder everywhere. She couldn't get out of her driver's side door. She had to crawl across the car and get out the passenger side door. And when she finally got out of the door, she was really shaken up. The airbags had gone off. She damaged some ligaments in her wrist. She was in pain, and she realized her vision was impaired and she couldn't see. And she immediately thought, oh my God, I've sustained significant head trauma, which has affected my vision. And she started to panic about that. And then as she calmed down, she realized that in the course of the crash, her glasses had been knocked off. And the impact on her vision was because her glasses were on the floor of the car, and she went back and got her glasses. So it's this cognitive break that takes away our ability to problem solve and think through situations and really be able to evaluate what's going on that we have to fight through. Now, the good news is all we have to do to resist these physiological stress responses is to simply lower our heart rate. So, all right, everyone listening, here's what I want you to do. Check out your Apple Watch, see what your current heart rate is. And on the count of 3, I want you to adjust your heart rate to 56 beats per minute. Ready, go. Not working, right? Can't do that. You can't just tune in your heart rate. But if you were able to do that, if you were able to lower your heart rate, you would have an effect on those physiological stress responses that cause you to be bad at confrontation. Here's the trick. You can't control your heart rate directly, but you can control your breathing. And for those of you who are practitioners, you know that breathing connects directly to heart rate. So what we can do rather than switching our heart rate to 55 beats per minute is take a long, deep breath in, hold it for 3 or 4 seconds, and slowly let that breath out. And if everyone does that, if every one of the 756 people listening to the webinar do that, you're going to feel a kind of a wave of relaxation. You're going to feel that sense of calm come over you. Now, in a critical situation, taking a deep breath isn't going to completely mitigate your physiological stress responses, but it will pull back in a little bit of your cognitive capacity, and it will slow down that heart rate a little bit and mitigate some of those physiological stress responses. When we train police officers and they're responding to like an intense, violent domestic incident, and I've gone to these, you get dispatched from across town, they tell you over the radio, it's bad, somebody's getting hurt. You put your car in gear and you're going 100 miles an hour, lights and sirens, cars cutting in front of you. You screech up in front of the house. You get out of your car and you approach that door and you can hear furniture crashing. You can hear screaming. The moment you turn that door handle and go through that door, you're going to be in an intense confrontation. You can imagine that an officer in that situation is experiencing a high level of stress and probably experiencing some physiological stress responses. So we tell them, before you turn that doorknob, pause for a moment, take a deep breath, let it out, get on the radio, 3 Paul 9, I'm on scene, I'm making entry. Just doing that is going to allow them to kind of open up their field of vision. It's going to allow them to hear better, to see better. If they need to manipulate a weapon system, they're going to get better fine motor skills. They're going to be able to communicate. They're going to be able to listen and process language and create language and problem solve a little bit better than if they crash through that door without taking a deep breath. One cue that tells you that you need to take this deep breath is if you get yourself caught in the goofy loop. So whether this, I've been in the goofy loop with my children, go to bed, no, go to bed, no, go to bed, no. If you get into a situation like that where you're not problem solving, you see it on TV when they play these videos of cops out on the street where the guy's got the knife and the cop's got the gun and the cop's going, drop the knife, no, drop the knife, no, drop the knife, no. That's the goofy loop. And if you're caught in that goofy loop and don't break it, there will be no positive resolution to whatever it is you're arguing about. So if you find yourself there, that's a cue that you need to take a deep breath and take a step back. And instead of going, drop the knife, I might say, hey, partner, my name is Mike. I'm with the police department. What's your name? I'd like to help you tonight. I'm concerned about you. That's going to get me a lot farther than drop the knife, or make your bed, pick up your shoes. You know, you've got to be able to engage the computer in order to implement any of the tools or solutions that we're going to talk about today. So once we've got that under control, once we've been able to bring some cognitive capacity back on, what kind of tools can we implement to help us problem solve? I've got a couple of handouts for you in the resources tab. So this first one is called De-Escalation by the Numbers when you pull it up on the resources tab. And it's a little bit more higher level, strategic, practiced methodology for engaging in these situations. So what I wouldn't do is whip out my de-escalation by the numbers while you're in the heat of battle with someone. This is something that you should kind of study beforehand, maybe keep in your desk drawer, look over before you are going to sit down with that employee to have that tough performance evaluation conversation, or before that client that you know always comes in at the front desk and tears you up. Before that client arrives, you could sit down and review this. So if you look through these step by step, our first step is to engage. And that is all about what we've been talking about, slowing things down, being able to open a channel for communication, focusing on what's important now, applying a little bit of empathy to the situation and thinking about, why is this person having this visceral reaction and how might I be able to mitigate it? What would I be thinking if I were in their shoes, and why might I be triggered by this event? So being able to kind of open up that communication channel, be cognizant of what your nonverbal communication is transmitting. So if you come at someone, you know, if I just do this, your body automatically interprets that to, ooh, Mike must be mad. He's throwing his hands up in the air, as opposed to coming at you with my, you know, maybe my hands open. So think about, be cognizant of how your nonverbal and verbal behavior is. If you slow your voice down and lower your tone, and speak more calmly, that will naturally provoke someone that you're talking to have the same response. And then consider what you're working with. What can I do to help? What do I actually legitimately have the authority to fix? You know, if this is a billing question and the person's late, can I give an extension? Can I give them another 30 days? What's available to me to help resolve this problem? And then, you know, keep it fact-based. Don't get tied up in the emotions of it. And then make a decision. But when you do that, try to frame it. When you do that and you communicate the decision, try to communicate it in a way that doesn't focus solely on policy or rules or regulation. Do it in a way that's human. Explain why you're doing what you're doing. Give them the framework for why you have a policy in place about billing and why the billing has to be completed by a particular day, and help kind of flesh out for them that it's just not because that's the rules. Here's why we have the rules. Because if we don't keep the funding flowing in at a particular time, we can't buy the supplies and resources and pay this, whatever the explanation is, but give them some time, give them the courtesy and the respect to explain why you're doing what you're doing. And then follow through, check in, see how that's working. And if it's not working, let's run the cycle all over again and see if we can come to a better resolution. So that's kind of a high level way of looking at these interactions and figuring out how to sort through them. That concept of being able to explain something to someone and treat someone with dignity and treat someone with respect and slow yourself down and open a communication channel, that's going to get you there most of the time. You're going to be able, if you can intuitively figure out ways to do that, you're going to get where you need to be most of the time with a difficult person. If you can slow yourself down and get your own computer running, you're going to be able to open up a communication channel and slow down the pace. This other resource, which is your de-escalation cheat sheet in your resource tab, gives you a step-by-step script, essentially, to how to handle a difficult person or a difficult conversation. And these steps really, as you work your way down this list and you activate these steps, most people are going to get with the program, are going to do the thing you're asking them to do, or stop doing the thing you're asking them to do. In the handout that I put in the resource tab, I actually wrote out a script for you of like asking someone to put on a mask who doesn't want to put on a mask. And it shows you how you can kind of operationalize these steps. But you begin with introducing yourself and telling someone who you are. You want to open a human connection. So if I'm a guy in a uniform, or I'm a vet tech in my scrubs, they see you as that thing, not necessarily as a person. So when I introduce myself to a student when I'm in uniform on campus, I don't say Chief Zegadlo with the Lewis University Police Department. I say, hi, I'm Mike from LUPD. So humanize yourself. Give that person a name that they can identify with, and open a voluntarily open a channel of conversation. Instead of, hey, come here, let me talk to you. You say, hi, I'm Mike from LUPD. Do you mind if I've talked to you for a minute? I'll give them the opportunity to voluntarily participate in the conversation. And then tell them why you're talking to them. Look, the reason I'm talking to you today is because, I noticed when you parked here to bring your dog into the clinic, you parked in our pickup space, and that's the space that we use for animals that we go out and pick up in the car. So I just need you to move your car over one space so that we can have that available for the other clients who are coming in for that particular service. So let them know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and give them an explanation, and then clarify that there might be give them a way out. There might be an explanation for why they did that. I know that sign for that parking space is kind of hard to see. We've been meaning to cut those bushes down. So make it so it's a perfectly understandable and reasonable mistake. And again, as you work down these steps, your compliance likelihood increases greatly. So even by the time you get to step 4 or 5, the percentile of people who are going to comply is pretty high. Maybe there's other information you need. Maybe that person couldn't pay their bill because they had another invoice and they were confused about it. So gather some more information if you need it. And then again, engage as a human being. Explain what you're trying to do and empathize. Look, I understand. When you're talking about a mask, I understand. I don't like wearing a mask either. It makes me feel like it's hard to breathe, and I don't think people can see my facial expression, so it screws up my communication mojo. I completely understand where you're going with this, but look, we really want to keep the community safe. We want to keep everyone healthy. We want to keep the business open. So if you would just work with me on this, we're going to all work together and maintain public health. So just taking that time to connect with someone in a human way, show some empathy, treat people with dignity, that's going to get you closer to where you need to be.
Hey, Mike.
And then if you're at step number 7 and things still aren't going your way, you're in a pretty narrow minority of people who are not compliant. Most people are going to get with the program. Now, the next step what you're going to do is kind of make a threat, but not really in a threatening way. You're going to give them 2 choices. Look, either you put the mask on. Look, I understand you don't want to wear the mask, and I don't like to wear the mask either. But if you don't put the mask on, then I have to call the manager, and it turns into a whole thing. And I don't want that, and you don't want that, and we just want to work together to accomplish what we're trying to get done today. So if you could just put the mask on for me, I would appreciate it. So you're threatening a consequence if they don't do what you're telling them to do, but you're doing it in kind of a nice way, and you're doing it in a kind of a look. You don't want that. I don't want that. We're just going to get along. And then if you make it to step 9, you're in probably the 99th percentile of non-compliant people at this point. You're going to give them one more opportunity. Is there anything else I can say or do that'll get you to put that mask on? And sometimes you might get a person who goes, you know what, just shut up and I'll put the mask on. That's when you revert back to what's important now. What's important now is getting them to put the mask on. So you go, oh, okay, I'll shut up. Thank you. And you allow them to put the mask on. So take your ego out of it, take your personal feelings out of it, and allow that compliance. And then if you do get to number 10, that's the point at which you're going to disengage. You've done everything you can do. You've explained it. You've treated them with dignity. You've displayed empathy. And if they're not going to get with the program, then you take whatever that next step is. Okay, I'm going to call my manager, or I'm going to call the police, or whatever that threat was that you made in step 8. Then you activate that if you get to step 10.
Hey, Mike.
Yes, Ray.
Just real quick, I just want to jump in for one thing. As you look over this list, and you'll see on there, it says, get a name and use the name. I'm a Starbucks junkie, and so they know me, and they call me by my first name. And I will tell you how important that is, not so much to me anymore because they know who I am, but when I was on the street and dealing with some adverse people, just the fact that I would get their name hey, Bill, listen, what's your first name? Bill. And I wouldn't be saying, give me your first, your last, your middle initial. That may come, but just the fact that you say, hey, Bill, I'm Ray, like Mike was talking about it at the university, that really takes some wind out of that, air out of that balloon, and starts to deflate that back down to getting back to a normal situation, bringing normality back to like a horrible situation. So don't underestimate using a person's name. They really do appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for making that point, Ray. I should have spoken more about that. That really is a very useful tool. So what I describe as problem-solving phrases that you can use are things like, hey, for your safety in mind, can you work with me? One of my favorites is, you look like a reasonable person. I have told in my career some of the most unreasonable, stupid, obnoxious, idiotic people that they are intelligent and reasonable, even though I don't believe they are. Because saying something like that to a person connects with their ego, and it makes them feel like, I'll be with, at 2:00 in the morning with the gangbanger on a traffic stop who I know has a gun in that center console along with his kilo of drugs. I'm going to look at him and say, look, partner, I've dealt with a lot of guys in these situations, and I can tell just by talking to you that you're really intelligent and you're a reasonable person. So if you just cooperate with me, we can get this done. I don't think he's intelligent or reasonable, but that connects with a human being and it resonates. And being able to work those channels to lower their energy level, to open up a communication channel is going to be real helpful. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about risk and threat, because I don't want any of you to apply any of these tactics or techniques in an environment where you might get hurt. So these are meant to be used with people who are not physically threatening to you, who are not a threat to your personal or public safety. So in this slide, this is extracted from our violence prevention program that we also do, but it is some of the risk factors that are common in people who are what we describe as the pathway to violence. So, and when we look at this list, it's a totality of the circumstances analysis. So just because you have someone who has a sense of grievance doesn't mean that they're a physical threat to you. But the more of these check boxes that you check, the higher the likelihood that this might be a person who could be on the pathway to violence. A sense of grievance, domestic issues at home, these significant life stressors that are illustrated in that middle graphic: cars getting repossessed, homes getting foreclosed on, they're in trouble at work, they're on a performance improvement plan, the spouse is breaking up with them, they're in trouble with the cops. Those are those significant life stressors. 93% of people who engaged in violent attacks made threats. So if you've got someone who's making physical threats, that's a red flag. That's probably a time to disengage with our de-escalation and maybe look at a different option. If they're eliciting concern from their peer community, so if you're all standing around the water cooler and talking about that one client, you're like, I just don't know what that guy's going to do next. He really freaks me out. And everyone feels the same way about that person. That's an indicator for cause for concern. Criminal history, substance abuse, fixation. Those are all, again, check boxes. And the ones on the left come from the Secret Service study on threat assessment, and the ones on the right come from other sources. So prior history of violence, elevated reaction to stimulus in the environment. So, you hand the client the bill, which is higher than they thought it was going to be, and they freak out and they pick your stapler up and throw it across the room. That should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up and give you an icky feeling in the pit of your stomach. And if you're getting that, that's cause for concern. These are just some risk factors that we want you to be aware of, that the more of them you start to see, we might not be in a good environment to try to practice some of these de-escalation skills. Ray's going to chime in on this slide a little bit, but some of these pre-attack indicators are behaviors that are indicative of someone who's about to jump off. So someone who might be getting ready to throw a punch at you. If they're if they're demonstrating a target glance, so they're looking at you, they're looking at the door, they're looking at your fist, they're kind of darting around with this target glance. If they're clinching anything, their teeth, their fists, that's something to be alert for. Anything weird with blinking, they're blinking with every word, or they're not blinking at all and they're staring at you with crazy eyes. a pugilistic stance. So they're getting into a fighting stance. They're putting their dukes up. They're lowering their center of gravity. They're flanking or moving off to the side. A hesitation in response. If you say, hey, could you give me your date of birth again? And they go, yeah, it's January. And they can't think of their date of birth. That's a sign that the computer's being shut off because they're getting ready to do something stupid. So the more of these pre-attack indicators you see, the more likely you might be dealing with somebody that could be in a position to hurt you.
Right. And just a couple other things here, Mike. This is what keeps us alive in law enforcement, and this absolutely transcends right over to you all as people walking around day to day and interacting with people in your community, your customers, your clients. We always talk about situational awareness. Everything that we do at RJM is situational awareness, knowing what's going on around you, okay, and being able to recognize that, because the best way to survive a bad incident is don't be there. Remove yourself from that situation before it actually becomes bad for you. And so when we look at these pre-attack indicators in law enforcement, we try to be really good at these to predict what may be coming. So a couple of the other ones is what they call grooming. So I'm looking in the camera right now, and I start like doing this. I start adjusting my collar. I start picking off lint off of my arm that's not there. Those are grooming techniques. That is setting you up to distract you for me to do something bad. When we talk about, when you know about the rapid breathing, you see that, and somebody's just, obviously you can tell the difference between someone that's breathing normally and someone that's just going crazy with their breathing. Again, be aware, probably best to remove yourself from that situation. The other one is this. I'm looking in this camera right now. I start looking past you. So I'm looking over here, and I'm looking over here. That's a couple of things that should trigger you right away to say something bad is about to happen here. I'm looking around to see who else is around that may see me attack you. I'm trying to distract you. So again, what we don't want to do is, when we're done with the seminar today, you're walking around like this, like, oh my God, I mean, I'm going to be triggered on every single thing that happens in life. No, but as you start to practice this, as you start to open up your vision, start looking what's going on around you. We teach these things. I'm trained in what's called Krav Maga. So we train an Israeli form of fighting. And the first thing we train is run. Don't fight, run. So recognize the bad thing is about to happen and remove yourself from that situation. You can take that, again, through every facet of your life, and know, that recognize that the threat is upon you. The best way to combat that threat is remove yourself from it. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Ray. I want to talk a little bit about our conflict management styles. And really important to that is the concept of assertiveness. So we've met people in our lives who are on different places on the continuum of assertiveness. Super highly assertive people might come off as aggressive. People who completely lack assertiveness might be a little bit unassertive. It's good to have a healthy amount of assertiveness so that you can be able to communicate and assert yourself. So one of the other resources that we dropped in the resource category is called conflict assessment. And it's a little fill in the blank quiz, so that after the presentation, you can grab this resource and you can fill out this assessment. And then there's a conflict management styles page that's also in there. So when you fill out the assessment, it's going to give you your primary and your secondary conflict management style. And it's going to tell you, based on your responses to that survey, where you fall on both the continuum of assertiveness and the continuum of cooperation. And that's what establishes your conflict management style. So for instance, if you're highly assertive and uncooperative, you're what we call a competitor. Now, that's not necessarily bad. There's a lot of very successful people who have a competitive conflict management style, but these are the win-lose kind of people who want to win, and they win by having the other person lose. On the opposite side, if you're highly uncooperative and lack assertiveness, you're an accommodator. And these are the folks that the competitors sometimes tend to roll over in the workplace. If you're both uncooperative and unassertive, you're an avoider, and you never get to the point where you're resolving the conflict. Now, most of us, if I were to ask you, where's the best place to be, would say right smack dab in the middle of equal levels of assertiveness and cooperativeness, and that's a compromiser. That's a pretty good place to be. And it's an okay way of managing conflict. But I would challenge you to go one step further and to strive to be a collaborator. Because in a collaborative conflict resolution, everybody gets everything they want and everyone walks away completely satisfied. Now that sounds like pie in the sky and it sounds, like lofty goals, but that's what I think your goal should be when you engage in the conflict resolution process, to try to get to a place where everyone gets everything they want and no one walks away a little bit unsatisfied. If we look at this in terms of win, lose, lose, win, our competitors are win-lose people. They win, the other guy loses, it's cut and dry, it's black and white. Our avoiders are lose-lose because they never engage in the conflict management process. Our accommodators are lose-win because they often give it up to the competitors. Compromise, where a lot of us end up, is okay, but it's a win-lose, win-lose. I give a little and I get a little, you give a little and you get a little. I'm not totally disappointed, but I'm not totally happy. You're not totally disappointed, but not totally happy. So it's an okay resolution, but not as good as collaboration, where it's a win-win. We both walk away satisfied and feeling like all of our needs are met. So if you can get yourself to that finish line in conflict management, that's a great place to be. If you do your conflict management survey and you score in a category that you don't like, you can change it. So if you show up that you're not assertive enough, you can work on that and you can have your colleagues help you work with that. If you're coming off kind of aggressive when you complete that survey, you can work with that. You can think about being more empathetic. You can think about kind of slowing down your assertiveness, and that can be a point of professional development for you. Kind of the last thing I'll leave you with comes from a theorist, I guess I'll describe him as, named Dr. George Thompson, who was a police officer back in the day. Prior to being a police officer, he was a martial artist. He was really good at, I don't know, whatever martial art he did, probably Krav Maga like Ray. But when he was an early young police officer, he would go out on the street, and in his first few weeks as a police officer, he was getting in fights every night. He would tell somebody to do something. When they wouldn't do it, he would put the Krav Maga on them and throw them in the back of the police car. And most of his use of forces were probably legal or lawful, but it wasn't really good for public relations or his career. And his sergeant said, look, George, you got to quit beating the crap out of people and start figuring out a way how to problem solve with them. So he went and got his PhD in psychology and began to study how it is people have these interactions. And he came up with a lot of the framework that we've used in this presentation, but these 7 specific things come directly from him. And these are the 7 things you should never say to anyone in a conflict situation. We start with what we've talked about before. Hey, you come here. That automatically opens up a channel for confrontation. Thompson would recommend, instead of that, hey, do you mind if I speak with you a minute? I'm Mike from the police department. Can I talk to you a second? And use their name and engage in a way that allows them to permit you to have communication with them instead of demanding that you're going to have communication with them. Ray said this at the very beginning. If you've ever been told to calm down, or you've ever told someone to calm down, you know how human beings react to being told to calm down. It never works. It's not going to calm me down to be told that, and I'm not going to get you to calm down by telling you to calm down, because what I'm essentially saying is you're being hysterical and irrational, and that's not productive. So instead of saying calm down, we might say, I want to help you. Can you please take a deep breath so I can understand everything you're saying? Tell me what's going on. Tell me what's the matter. Get into that channel of empathy. Don't tell people, I'm not going to tell you again. We do this with our kids all the time, right? Because that's a threat, and there's got to be a consequence at the end of it. If you cut off communication, say, I'm not going to tell you again, what's going to happen next if you have to tell them again? So try to say things like, is there anything else I can do to get you to work with me on this? It's important that you understand this piece. Use those as alternatives. Telling someone to be more reasonable is like telling someone to calm down. It tells them that they're being unreasonable and irrational, and that's offensive, and that's going to get their hackles up and get them more fired up. So try something like, let me see if I understand what I hear you saying is. Let me see if I understand your position. Because those are the rules. We talked about this before. Try to explain to people what's going on. Don't rely on the rule book or the policy book solely. 70% of people are going to get with the program if you just tell them why you want them to do a thing. Don't say what's your problem, because the response is going to be you're my problem. Try something instead like, what's the matter? How can I help you? I can tell you're upset. Let's work through this together. What do you want me to do about it? That's a pushing off of responsibility on someone. Not my problem is what that translates into. So try instead, let's figure this out together. I wish I knew the answer to that, but I don't. I'm sorry. Let me look into that and I can get back to you. Ultimately, we have to understand that insulting someone strengthens resistance and shuts their eyes. But if you treat people with civility, it's going to weaken resistance and get them to work with you and be human. I tell the cops it's tactical to be nice, and that resonates with them. Leave people feeling better than they were at their worst moment. Left a little bit of time for questions at the end, so we'd be happy to entertain those. I think Peggy was going to kind of facilitate Q&A if that's
Yeah.
next.
Yep. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
As I anticipated, there are a few questions, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. And just a reminder, and maybe put your contact information slide up next, Mike and Ray, and then that way, as we're talking, if we don't get to somebody's question, they can reach out to you after the session's over, because there are probably maybe more than we can get to. So the first one is, what steps do you believe are important to keep in mind when teaching someone else? I think the immune response is an important detail.
Yeah, I would say you answered your own question there. The biggest hurdle here is to be able to compose yourself. You can't control another person's behavior, but by mitigating your own physiological stress response and controlling your own communication, you can have a massive impact on how that conversation is going, just by lowering your own energy and opening up a communication channel and slowing yourself down enough so that you're actually interacting with someone rather than arguing with them.
You know, one other thing I would add, and this went back to one of the last slides we did. It's okay to say, I don't have the answer to that, to your issue, but let me see if I can help you resolve this. Think about when you're on the phone with customer service and you're on there for 10 or 15 minutes and someone comes on and all of a sudden they say, so, you know, hi, this is so-and-so, and how can I help you? And you tell them, you go, well, that's just not my area. I'm gonna have to send you to somebody else. The way you can de-escalate a situation before it escalates is treat people the way you'd want to be treated. If you do that, a lot of the slides here, I think it's great information that we presented. You're going to avoid a lot of this. If you can just put yourself in the position of the person that's standing across from you or on the phone with you.
Great. Okay, next question. When I try to relax and breathe, I tend to smile, which has been interpreted by upset clients as laughing at them. Any suggestions?
It's going to sound weird, but practice in front of a mirror. Practice taking a deep breath and calming down. And you can observe your own facial features. And that's something that, you know, it's like shooting that free throw. If you practice that and kind of build that in, you can get to the point where you're overcoming that.
All right. What's the best way to handle a conversation with a team member who is dismissive and non-receptive to feedback?
Well,
I would start, Ray, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike. You're probably going to make more sense.
I would start by communicating back to them what you're observing in a way that's non-confrontational. So judging by your reaction to what I'm saying, it sounds like you're not really open to my conversation. Am I reading that correctly? Am I reading you correctly in that you don't appreciate this criticism? And is there a way I could maybe communicate it better where we could have an understanding? Those are difficult conversations to have, but I think honesty and being straightforward in a way that's not confrontational could get you where you need to be.
I think this is obviously more of an HR topic. When I used to teach performance evaluations at one of the universities, and how do you perform those? The one thing you don't want to do is, if this is a continuing issue with this employee, whatever that issue may be, they shouldn't be hearing it the first time at their performance evaluation. There should be some dialogue previous to that, because that's when you really are going to need to de-escalate something, is when I'm sitting across from you and we sit down and you basically say, Ray, you know what? You're really a horrible employee and here's why. boom, 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 boom. And I would say back to you, well, you're telling me this now. You've obviously seen these traits in me, and I've had no opportunity to improve myself. Again, go back to when we started almost an hour ago. You can avoid de-escalation by doing some of the simple things so that you don't have to get to that point where you're de-escalating a bad issue.
How long do you give time-wise for the back and forth until you decide to end it and then move on?
That's relative to the person with whom you're interacting. I'm thinking of, there's a parent that we deal with here frequently, and I'm considered I won't use her name, but the person whisperer for this parent. I can get on the phone with her, but I know if I get on the phone with her, I'm going to be on the phone with her for an hour and a half, because that's how long it takes for us to get through the de-escalation process, where she screams and curses and yells. And then eventually we get to the point where we can open a communication channel. So it depends on how much time you're willing to spend and how valuable salvaging that conversation with a person can be. But it can go on for a long time. We have to be patient to do this correctly. And that's part of the problem, is that we run out of patience fast and we get fed up, and then we want to cut it off or switch gears. But the longer you hang in there, the more likely you're going to get to a resolution.
It seems like a little bit similar theme, but when someone is already at a 10 and you are trying to de-escalate, but they are refusing to even hear you, what's next?
Managing your own energy almost always will be reflected in that person. It may be reflected in small increments, little by little, but if you continue to, unless, there are people with cognitive and emotional disorders who just don't respond normally to human communication techniques. But for people who don't have those challenges, if you hang in there and you keep your energy low and you continue to empathize and work those techniques, you'll eventually get them down from a 10 to a 9, and then from a 9 to an 8, and eventually to a point where you can have a conversation.
Okay, what advice do you have for successful de-escalation over the phone when body language isn't able to be used?
I find letting them run their energy down a little bit. So, I've put the receiver down and just put the speaker on and let people holler at me for 15 minutes until they kind of run their battery down a little, and then begin to apply the techniques. It sounds like you're very upset about this parking ticket that you received. Tell me more about why that bothered you so much. And then you can kind of engage. But sometimes just letting them blow off a little pressure. I think our initial response when we get one of those angry phone calls is we want to engage right away. We get into our verbal fighting stance. And you got to catch yourself and go, okay, this person's really cranked up, and they need to burn off some of this energy before they re-enter the atmosphere. So let them do it. Give them, if you got 10 minutes, if you can do 15 minutes, let them run their course, and then they'll eventually get to a point where they'll allow you to problem solve with them.
All right, I think we got time for one more. Do you recommend having another person from the management team present when you have to address a peer conflict issue between employees, or maybe even with clients for that matter?
Yeah, I think that's important. I think if the situation is to go south, and it could be a number of different ways. I mean, obviously we know that employees have become violent, but most of the time it's just an angry interaction, and you're trying to mitigate that and de-escalate that. Having somebody else with you, that if horribly something goes bad, you at least have somebody there, A, to help you if it's a physical confrontation, and B, witness and be able to document if this turns into some type of litigation down the road. I'm always a big fan of at least, I wouldn't say 5 people, but certainly 2 people in my estimation. I don't know, Mike, maybe you have a different opinion, is better than just, one-on-one.
Well, sometimes having somebody there just as a note taker is helpful too, so that you can focus, you can stay engaged in the conversation, and your other person is kind of the note taker and parliamentarian.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Ray and Mike. I know I've taken copious notes, and I don't know that you've got the chat open because I told you to close it so you won't be distracted, but lots of great comments. People very appreciative of all the information and how helpful it was.
Great.
And I also want to, again, thank our sponsor, Nord Health, for sponsoring our webinar for today. And this concludes our webinar for today.